All right, let's watch this second thought video because I'm in a bad mood. So let's make it worse. Let's make it worse, chat. Why are the Democrats funding the far right? You heard that right. Not the Republicans. The Democrats. Now, chat, there was once this campaign. You may have not have heard of it, but it was for between two candidates. And their names were Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party supported Donald Trump, and they did what they could to boost his odds of winning the primary because they thought, Donald Trump will be a hell of a lot easier to beat than, say, Marco Rubio. So they helped boost Donald Trump in the media. And as you know, Donald Trump was defeated. Hillary Clinton became a two-term president. She appointed 6 members of the Supreme Court. They added D.C. as a state. And the Democrats have a 62 Senate majority right now. Obviously, they're up by 50 seats in the House. So it was a big win, good strategy. So they've been doing it ever since. And it's kind of surprising because you think like, wow, isn't it dangerous to support a far-right candidate? Like, what if Donald Trump had won? What if their efforts to push the Republicans to the right made the country even more polarized? All right, well, let's go take a look what they've done. Darth Fergus, thank you for the 60 months. You know, I can really think that it's dangerous, but, you know, it works. You know, the proof's in the pudding, right? Like, Donald Trump got his ass beat by Hillary Clinton, so how could we ever question them?
This is Republican State Senator Doug Mastriano. He's the Republican who's ahead in the polls for governor.
Earlier this year, Democrat Josh Shapiro spent $840,000 on this ad for far-right Republican candidate Doug Mastriano.
He wants to end vote by mail, and he led the fight to audit the 2020 election.
In June, the Democratic Colorado PAC funded this ad for far-right candidate Ron Hanks. And you better believe that back in May, the Democratic Governors Association ran this ad for the far-right Republican Darren Bailey. Before I explain what's going on, look at this ad. This one was funded by a Nancy Pelosi PAC in California. Try to remember that while you're watching it, because this is what these ads look like in practice.
Same label, so Republicans gotta check the ingredients. David Valadao claims he's Republican. Yet, David Valadao voted to impeach President Trump. Yeah, Valadao voted to impeach Trump. And Republican Chris Matisse, a true conservative, 100% pro-Trump and proud. Pro-Trump Republican Chris Matisse, military veteran, local businessman. Or politician David Valadao who voted to impeach Trump. Republicans, it's time to decide. House Majority PAC is responsible for the content of this ad.
All these ads are essentially the same. They're all targeted at a conservative audience, and they all paint the candidates in the same way, as the most conservative candidate that's closest to Trump. In other words, as the Republican voter's best choice. What the f is going on? In simple terms, the Democratic Party is literally funding far-right politicians. Not just the opposition, not just any Republican, but the extreme wing of the GOP. If you're new here, allow me to be the first to welcome you to the shining city on a hill and beacon of democracy that is the US. Don't mind the fire. These ads are really, really weird. Not just because one party is funding another, that's already insane. It's the specific kinds of candidates being funded. The kind of candidates Democrats say they hate. If you've been following them for a while, you might remember this clip of Joe Biden talking about how America needed a strong and principled Republican Party.
We need a Republican Party. We need an opposition that's principled and strong.
And it's not just Joe. Nancy Pelosi said the same thing about needing a strong Republican Party earlier this year. She told the press that she was really bummed about the GOP being, quote, hijacked by extremists. But less than 4 months later, she was the one paying for the hijackers' plane tickets. At first, this might look like hypocrisy. Democrats say they want a moderate opposition, but they fund the far right. They say one thing, do another, we, the public, catch them in a lie, and bim bam boom, democracy is saved and we can all go home. But that's actually not what's happening. There is nothing hypocritical about Democrats saying they want a moderate opposition and then funding a far-right challenger. That's because these are actually two sides of the same political strategy coin. A strategy that, as we'll see, not only reveals the class interest of the Democratic Party, but shows us one of the mechanical ways our capitalist society is decaying into fascism. If that sounds dramatic, just wait. I promise you it's not. But let's go from the beginning, and start by explaining why Democrats are funding these candidates in the first place. The first thing to know is that
1 second, chat. Just relax, okay? Just sit back. Just relax. Fine. It's fine. Fine. It's all fine, okay? It's all fine. Everything's gonna be a-okay, alright?
Explaining why Democrats are funding these candidates in the first place. The first thing to know is that midterms are coming up and the Democrats are terrified. Biden's numbers are in the trash, and all reliable, funding a war in a foreign country isn't working quite as well as it usually does. There is little hope that Democrats will get a majority again, so they need a way to tilt the odds in their favor, and they've figured out how. Democrats are hoping that by making a bunch of far-right nutjobs win GOP primaries, 2 things will happen in general elections. 1, moderate Republicans will be outraged and vote for a more centrist blue candidate, and 2, solidly left-wing voters will also be outraged and vote for the lesser of 2 evils out of necessity. And the problem is that this strategy has worked for them before. In 2012, another Democrat, Claire McCaskill, spent $1.7 million on ads for the ultra-conservative Todd Akin, more than Akin spent himself. The result? Akin got a boost in the polls as soon as the ads started running, won the GOP primary, and then lost against McCaskill in the general election. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't even a secret. McCaskill herself said, "There were 3 viable candidates, and Todd Akin was kind of the weirdest one. I knew he might say some weird things if he were nominated. And he had less money, so we took a poll and figured out what Republican voters would really like about him." She even went on to write this article about it. Democrats fund these campaigns because they win when their opposition are far-right weirdos. Except when they don't. Funding a far-right candidate and saying they want a moderate opposition are 2 ways for the Democrats to do the same thing: to position the Democratic Party as the only reasonable political choice. By saying that the Republicans are being hijacked by extremists and then actively funding that hijacking, the Democrats are creating an image of themselves as the only remaining bastion of democracy, the only way to vote that won't actively tear the country down. At least until the Republicans go, quote-unquote, back to normal, which Democrats know will never happen. Democrats are reliant on the right being represented by the worst guy imaginable, and will actively work to make that the case. Either, as we see here, with direct funding, or more commonly, by pitting themselves only against candidates like Trump. Clinton never campaigned against guys like Jeb Bush. Her opponent was only whoever was the farthest to the right and could make her supporters most upset. She drummed up a radical opposition because it's a much safer strategy than running against someone who shared a lot of her ideas. But this strategy has a couple different outcomes. It might, as Democrats hope, bring some moderate Republicans to their side and get more blue voters out to the polls. Maybe. But it might completely backfire and their funding will just have gotten more far-right wackos into politics. No one can know for sure what's going to happen come election time. What is guaranteed, though, is that this lesser of 2 evil strategy allows the Democrats to move further right and still get votes from left-wing voters. And it actively promotes fascism. More ad spots featuring quasi-fascist politicians, brandishing fascist slogans, and actively supporting the president who, so far, has embodied fascism the most, all promote the popularity of fascism in the US. That is undeniable. At the end of the day, fascism is getting more airtime, convincing more conservatives, and the Democrats are absolutely to blame. With not the best odds of winning, and with the knowledge that this strategy promotes ultra-conservative politics in America, why would the Democrats run these ads? After all, Democrats aren't fascists, they're liberals. There is a difference. Why are they going with a risky strategy that, even in its best case scenario, actively makes society worse? There are 2 explanations. One, mechanical, at the party level. This strategy is a direct product of the way the Democratic Party is organized. Another, at the societal level. This strategy is the product of how our entire economy is organized. Let's start with that second one. You may have heard the phrase, fascism is capitalism in decay. That sentence is used to say that as capitalism starts failing the people it usually benefits, starts decaying, it concedes strategic ground to fascism in order to survive. It's an idea that gained traction in the 20th century when socialists realized that capitalism wasn't being replaced by socialism like they expected. World War I and the Great Depression, brought on by a global economic crash, didn't lead to socialism replacing capitalism's global hegemony. Instead, reactionary movements started popping up everywhere, most notably in Germany and Italy. Capitalism hadn't been replaced by socialism, it had adapted into something new, fascism.
So, yeah, I mean, originally, everyone believed that capitalism would just naturally collapse due to its internal contradictions and be replaced by socialism, be replaced by communism, right? And what we found, to people's surprise, is that the capitalist form was very resilient. And it started to have these antibodies to socialism, which is fascism, which is basically an immune response to the sickness of capitalism. And it can be put together very simply. If the question is between democracy and capitalism, capitalists choose capitalism. They don't believe in anything. They don't have human solidarity. So they decide to dispense with the democracy, dispense with the lower strata of society.
A political economic system that didn't look like capitalism, and that often even gave up on, quote, free markets, but that preserved the private ownership and profits of the capitalist class. The same people were on top, but things looked a little different. Here's how socialists explain something like this happening. As capital concentrates into fewer and more powerful monopolies, as the rate of profit falls, as more and more people are kicked into poverty and those remaining in the workforce are increasingly overworked, the conditions that produce fascism begin to appear. Monopoly capitalism, the inevitable outcome of winner-take-all competition, leads to economic stagnation and crashes. The first victims of this stagnation and these crashes are, of course, the working class, as we saw in the Great Depression, 2008, and with the COVID.
I really like this video. I think Second Thought has really stepped up. I think Second Thought, hanging out with Hakeem and Upnik, have really increased the quality of his thought and his videos. I really think that he's becoming a fantastic resource for people discussing this. You know, before he had all sorts of weird, let me just say, anarcho-NATOist adjacent takes. Like, he had a really bad take on charter schools that absolutely sent me into a rage. But I feel like he's really improved quite a bit. And this is not this is not a 2 cheers for Second Thought. This is a 3 cheers for him. He's really improved, and I like his videos a lot more. I feel like every month he gets better. Jerk Store, thank you for the Prime, bud. Welcome back. Wonder what made him choose to show his face finally. You want to know the truth? You gotta have a little bit of the parasocial relationship with your viewers, you know? You gotta do it. That's because you listened to half his charter school take? No, I listened to it. I listened to the whole thing. Don't argue. Trust me.
Recession. Millions of people are suddenly thrust into poverty and can't make ends meet. The thing is that within this context, governments are no longer able to rule as they usually do. They have to resort to more direct violence to keep their hold on power. People's demands are no longer brushed away by politicians in assemblies. They're actively resisted with cops on the street. For example, when people start demanding to defund the police or for a price freeze on basic necessities. Political stagnation is just no longer an option for capitalist governments now that tens of millions of people's immediate needs aren't being met. So to preserve that political gridlock that is so stable and profitable, governments get used to scaling up the violence. But when people need to vote you in to govern, governments need to find a justification for this sudden growth in state violence. And this is where fascism comes in.
Yeah.
Fascists usually explain
this is such a good analysis. Damn. What the fuck? He's so right. Lanzus EV, thank you for the 27 months.
The decay of capitalism, not by the inherent flaws of the system.
Oh, by the way, chat. We have a new emote. DSA Dance. I didn't mention this. You probably have seen it in chat. And you may not have noticed it, but this is in fact new. So it's Friday then. We all gotta dance. And so if you want access to DSA Dance, then you've got to subscribe. You gotta subscribe.
System, but by its corruption by a small minority.
Oh, and there's a cool new feature, chat, where you can tag artists of emotes. So if one of the mods could put together a list of all the people who have submitted emotes, so I could tag the appropriate user as an artist, that would be cool. That would be cool. Just a suggestion for the mods. All right, let's keep going. John Draws was the Twitch name of the artist. Yeah, I know that because I already tagged him. Talk about all the other emotes. John Draws. All right, let's keep going.
Minority. A minority usually separated out from the rest of society along arbitrary lines, like race, ethnicity, or place of birth. Fascists assert that it is these minorities, not the natural tendency for wealth to accumulate into fewer hands under capitalism, that has pushed the masses into misery, and therefore that state violence is legitimate in order to punish those minorities and anyone who defends them or advocates for systemic change. After all, the system is perfect.
Did you see
it's
the top
those
G
people
emote that
that are the
Hasan Chatter
problem.
made? No.
Fascists explain away the failure
just
of the
sent it to
system
me.
and its sudden uptick in violence with scapegoating.
This
It's
is
as
very
simple as
important.
that.
This is a very important point, chat. Like, the essence of fascism is you have to have a scapegoat. And the scapegoat has to be simultaneously... Mike, you refuse to watch a Renegade Cut video about the same subject of what's happening today with capital flocking fascists to suppress workers and minorities and how the same happened. If I refuse to watch Renegade Cut, it's probably because the video was either too long or too anarchist / liberal. Top G. By the way, chat, make sure that you tell Condition Bleen that we have 94 emote slots open and we have 25 personal emotes. So if you have an emote idea, let's fucking go. Just throw it my way. Condition Bleen is in charge of this, in case you didn't know. So we got slots. Slots on slots on slots.
Because this kind of narrative is beneficial to established capitalist governments, this struggle for power gets mirrored at the national level.
Helene, thank you for gifting a sub. Orb, thank you for resubbing. Lannis EV, thank you for the 27 months. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you.
That benefit from capitalism would rather concede to fascism and keep their benefits, rather than allow for socialism to grow in popularity and upset their power and private interests. This theory of fascism is
now. I mean, we can't hype train during the shill. No, I would just have to. Here, let me refresh. All right, everybody, try to do top G. Everybody do top G. All right, hold on. I gotta refresh the chat box. Hold on. Gotta refresh the chat box. All right, keep going. Go. Everybody go. Do it. Spam. There we go. It's working now.
Is how socialists explain the 20th century. But practically speaking, how does this concession to fascism actually happen? What exactly is it that has to take place for fascism to gain this kind of place in society and government? This is where the Democratic Party comes in. You probably know that another idea, socialism, has gained traction these past few years. Around 70% of millennials and Gen Z say they are somewhat or extremely likely to vote for a socialist. And nearly a quarter of them believe society would be better if all private property was abolished. Faced with this demographic information, the Democrats have two choices. Either they adopt socialist policies, or they win elections. The thing is, they can't do both, not at a party-wide level. That's because the Democrats aren't just contending with the public's pressure when they run for office. While the public may want socialism more than ever before, not every Democrat can adopt socialist rhetoric and policies into their program. That's because at the core of every Democrat strategy is the question of how do you get funding? Average people don't contribute that much to political campaigns, and very wealthy people will not fund a party with policies that threaten their profits. They just won't. Not if that threat starts becoming real. A few socialists in the party is okay, but a party that embraces socialism can't afford to run nearly as many ads. That means that Democrats who support socialist policies will have to fight an upstream battle. They'll need to fundraise at a much more grassroots level. They'll have to contend with constant villainization in media institutions owned and operated by some of the wealthiest people on Earth. And they will constantly deal with the pressure of simply existing within a party that is not hospitable to socialist ideas. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't succeed. It just means it's the hardest path to success.
True.
With these kinds of challenges,
Who the fuck watches ads? Boomers.
more Democrats will take the easy win of running against a far-right opponent to try to capture centrist voters. Fascism grows just because it's easier. This kind of system doesn't need anyone to be evil. It doesn't need anyone to lie. Nobody needs to be actively dishonest. Enough people just need to follow the path of least resistance. It is in the material interest of Democrats to not concede any more ground to socialism than is absolutely necessary for their survival. And by comparison, it's much easier to fund and then run against the far right. The more their platform is influenced by the anti-capitalist left, the more likely they are to lose elections. So without...
This I don't agree. I don't agree. I think he's wrong about that. The left-wing positions are very popular. And there is certainly a serious situation with, like, especially because... See, like, here's the thing with young people and politics. All right? Here's where I don't agree with him. The current status quo of campaign finance is not how it's always been. All right? It was Citizens United that happened during the Obama administration, which got rid of the rules and allowed things like super PACs and stuff to go buck wild. It's still not supported by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party does not support, as an institution, the status quo of campaign finance. Under the right political situation, namely a left-leaning Supreme Court, you could get rid of that shit and impose all sorts of regulations. Furthermore, they passed a bill last year called the For the People Act that included public financing for congressional elections with small dollar matches, where if a candidate promised not to take any donation larger than $1,000, they would get like a 5-to-1 match or whatever it was. So there's policies here that could change the calculation of campaign finance. I find this excessively deterministic. And this is something that happens with leftists, and you need to watch yourself, is go like, you create a story in your head that seems logical and consistent, and you don't actually measure it against imperial reality. Wow, I just did a fucking Andrew Tate. Empirical reality. I just did an Andrew Tate. Oh, fuck. I was watching too many Andrew Tate videos. Fuck. I was watching too many Andrew Tate videos of him getting owned by Hasan. Oh, fuck. But you get my point, chat. You're a top J. Can we get some top G's in the chat? The reality is that these things can actually be defeated. Bernie Sanders was runner-up twice. He's not the absolute ceiling of the leftist politics. All right? Like, don't be so fucking pessimistic, dude.
Trying to make fascism more popular. Just by being okay with it happening to win elections, fascism gains traction in our society. This is not the only way fascism takes over, but man is it an effective one. That is why I constantly talk about alternative networks of power on this channel. Why I focus so much on the institutions of our government and how they're constructed. Why I keep telling you to organize, unionize, participate in mutual aid, and study up and disseminate information on alternatives to the capitalist economic model. The natural tendency of our elected institutions and political parties is to prioritize
He wore this sweater before. Didn't he wear this sweater before? He's wearing the same sweater again. He wore this sweater before. That's a true leftist right there.
Model. The natural tendency of our elected institutions and political parties is to prioritize capitalism, even when it fails most people and starts relying on fascism to survive. Our institutions were built with preserving capitalism in mind, not to be accurate reflections of the public's will, especially when the public turns to socialism. Without building institutions that can resist this natural tendency, this country will comfortably slide into fascism. We can and we must put a stop to it. The US is kind of in a boiling frog scenario. We're not just gonna wake up one day and someone will have flipped the fascism switch. It's a process, and we're already pretty far along. It is so important that we come to terms with that fact and act accordingly. I try my best to learn and understand as much as I can so I can share with others. And one way I like to do that is by listening to audiobooks. I travel a lot for work, so I have plenty of time to sit on planes and listen to fascinating audiobooks on Audible. One great one that I recently listened to is Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds. It is hands down one of the best works I've found that really explains what fascism is about and how it relates to capitalism. If you like to learn as much as I do, getting to pick a free audiobook every month is pretty nice. I don't think and get your... If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like. If you hated it, a thumbs down. You can check out my previous content by clicking the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.
Good book, man. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap